The hall was filled with the gentle hum of conversation and laughter. The air carried the scent of fresh bread and coffee, mixed with the faint aroma of flowers that someone had thoughtfully placed on each table. Sunlight poured through the large windows, casting warm golden patches on the wooden floor. People moved freely, greeting each other with nods, smiles, and occasional hugs. It was one of those community gatherings that happened every few months, where familiar faces came together to enjoy simple food, stories, and company. No one really noticed the man at first. He stepped through the doorway quietly, his presence subtle and unassuming. He was dressed in a simple shirt and trousers, carrying a worn piano case in one hand. His shoes were dusty, suggesting a long journey, and his eyes carried a calmness that seemed out of place in such a lively room. A few people glanced his way and smiled politely, but most were too absorbed in their conversations to pay him much attention. He walked slowly, letting the sound of the gathering reach him before he found a place near the old piano at the corner of the hall. The piano looked well used, its surface scratched and faded, yet cared for. It had been part of the hall for as long as anyone could remember, waiting silently for someone to bring it to life. The man opened the case and gently lifted the piano lid, revealing the keys that had been pressed by many hands over the years. People noticed him at this point, curiosity beginning to stir. A few of the children stopped running around, their laughter fading into quiet observation. Adults turned their heads, wondering if he had been invited to play, or if he was simply passing through. Someone asked politely, "Would you like to play for us?" And the man nodded softly, acknowledging the invitation without a word. There was no rush in his movements, no hurry to impress. He simply settled onto the bench, adjusting his posture, and placed his hands over the keys. First, he didn't play. He just sat there, taking in the room, the people, and the subtle sounds around him. The ticking of a clock on the wall, the murmur of conversation, the scrape of a chair against the floor. They all became part of his preparation. There was a quiet expectation in the room now. The casual chatter had dulled to whispers and occasional glances. Everyone sensed that something was about to happen, though no one knew exactly what it would be. Then he pressed a single key, and the sound floated across the hall. It was soft, almost hesitant, yet it carried a resonance that seemed to reach deeper than the ears, touching something in the hearts of those who listened. People stopped moving, their eyes drawn instinctively to the man and the piano. The children leaned closer, and even those who had been talking quietly paused mid-sentence, captivated by the gentle note that seemed to linger in the air. The man began to play more notes, slow and deliberate, each one careful and meaningful. It wasn't a melody that anyone immediately recognized, but there was a familiarity in it, like a memory just out of reach. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was patient, inviting the listener to lean in and follow. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched intently, noticing the subtle movements of his fingers and the way his hands seemed to float above the keys. There was a sense of story in the music, though no words were spoken. The notes rose and fell, sometimes light and playful, other times deep and somber. People could feel the emotions behind each press of a key. Some felt a sudden pang of nostalgia, recalling moments from their own past. Others felt a strange comfort, as if the music understood unspoken fears and joys. The atmosphere in the hall changed from casual socializing to something more intimate, something shared and profound. As the man continued, small details began to emerge. He would pause between phrases, letting a note linger, allowing it to breathe. The silence that followed was just as important as the music itself, giving the listeners time to absorb and reflect. You could see it in their faces, soft smiles, furrowed brows, closed eyes, small sighs of recognition. Everyone was connected, not by conversation or eye contact, but by the subtle language of sound. The children, who had moments before been running around without care, now sat quietly on the floor, their heads slightly tilted, as if trying to understand the story the piano was telling. A few adults reached for tissues they hadn't needed minutes before, dabbing at eyes that were suddenly wet. No one spoke. There was no need. The music filled the space between people, filling it with feelings that were often hard to put into words. He never looked at the audience directly. His gaze was focused, not on them, but on the music, on the keys, on the invisible path each note had to travel. Yet somehow each person felt personally addressed, as if the man was speaking to them individually through the piano. There was no showmanship, no grand gestures, only sincerity and presence. That was what made it so powerful. Some of the older attendees remembered similar moments from their youth, times when music had a way of changing a room, of holding attention and hearts in a delicate balance. They exchanged brief, knowing glances, understanding that something rare was happening before them. Even those who didn't usually get moved by music felt a stirring inside, an unexpected recognition of beauty and emotion. Minutes passed, though no one was watching the clock. Could have been 5 minutes or 50. Time had a way of fading when something genuine and profound was unfolding. Each note was a thread, weaving a tapestry of feeling that bound the people together in silence. It was almost as if the piano had become a voice, not just an instrument, and the man was its storyteller, sharing tales of life, longing, and quiet joy. The soft hum of the room, once filled with chatter, had vanished completely. Even the usual sounds of movement, the clinking of cups, the shifting of chairs, had disappeared. All that remained was the music and the quiet acknowledgement that they were witnessing something extraordinary. There was no applause yet, no comment, only the shared realization that they were experiencing a rare moment of authenticity, where art and human connection met seamlessly. By the time he finished the first simple piece, a hush lingered. People blinked, slowly coming back to awareness of the room. Some could not help but smile, still moved by the tender beauty they had just encountered. Others had tears in their eyes, though they quickly tried to wipe them away, unsure of how to express the emotions that had surfaced. The man sat still for a moment, letting the silence hold the impact of his music. Even as he took a deep breath and prepared for the next piece, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. People were no longer just attendees at a gathering. They were witnesses to something rare, a reminder of how simple gestures could touch hearts deeply. Conversations could wait. Laughter would return in its own time. For now, the room belonged to the music and to the quiet, shared understanding that life's beauty often arrives unexpectedly, carried in the soft notes of a piano and the presence of someone who plays not for recognition, but for connection. And so, the first part of his story began. Not with words, but with a single note that opened hearts and drew the attention of every person in the hall, setting the stage for a journey that would move them far more deeply than they could have imagined. After the first gentle piece ended, the room seemed suspended in a moment that no one wanted to break. The soft echoes of the notes hung in the air, touching the hearts of everyone present. The man didn't rush into the next piece. He sat quietly, his fingers resting lightly on the keys, as if listening to the silence that had settled around him. Every person in the room felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though they were all waiting for a story to unfold that only this piano and its player could tell. He began again, this time with a slightly richer tone, pressing the keys in sequences that felt familiar yet new. The music was more intricate now, weaving patterns that carried the weight of memory and longing. It was the kind of melody that stirred feelings long buried, making people pause and remember things they had almost forgotten. The man's hands moved with ease, fluidity, and a certain tenderness that suggested both practice and deep emotion. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them without distraction. They swayed slightly in their seats, following the invisible rhythm that guided the room. A woman near the back rested her hand on her chest, feeling the slow rise and fall of emotion that came with each note. An elderly man leaned forward, his eyes glistening as memories of his youth seemed to play out in front of him. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, completely captivated, sensing the emotion without fully understanding it. They were learning, in a silent and powerful way, that music could speak where words sometimes failed. The melody began to shift, transitioning from a gentle, reflective tone to something more lively and vibrant. Fingers danced over the keys, creating patterns that made the heart lift and the eyes sparkle. Laughter began to bubble up softly, not from the conversation but from the joy that the music brought. Some people smiled widely, sharing glances that said without words, "Isn't this wonderful?" It was a rare kind of happiness, quiet yet profound, filling the room in a way that ordinary conversation could not. Despite the complexity of the notes, there was a clarity in the music, a directness that seemed to communicate without effort. It was as if the piano were telling a story, and each person in the room understood it in their own way. Some felt hope, others sadness, and many experienced a blend of emotions that was difficult to name. It was the kind of music that made the invisible visible, revealing layers of feeling that everyday life often hides. The man continued, shifting to softer, slower passages. The sound became more intimate, almost like a whisper shared with the listener personally. The audience leaned in closer, some resting their heads on their hands, others sitting stiffly to take in every note. Each chord seemed deliberate, chosen to evoke a specific memory or sensation. There were pauses between phrases that allowed the music to breathe, giving people a chance to feel the lingering emotions and reflect on their own lives. One mother held her young daughter on her lap, letting her rest against her shoulder as the piano filled the room. The child's small hands reached out instinctively, almost as if trying to touch the music itself. The mother smiled softly, feeling a connection not just to her daughter, but to the universal beauty unfolding before her. Across the room, a man in a worn coat dabbed at his eyes with the corner of his sleeve, surprised by the depth of feeling stirred within him. It was as if the music had reached places inside him he had forgotten existed. As the piece continued, the man's expression remained calm but focused. He seemed to draw emotion from the room as much as he projected it, a silent exchange between performer and audience. People began to notice the subtle details, the way his fingers lingered on certain keys, the delicate rise and fall of his hands, the small nods of his head that marked the rhythm of the story he was telling. Even those who didn't consider themselves sensitive to music felt moved, caught up in the flow of emotion that had taken over the hall. The melody shifted again, this time bringing a sense of tension and release. The notes became more urgent, pressing forward with purpose, then retreating softly, creating a sense of anticipation and surprise. The audience felt it physically, as if their hearts were moving in sync with the piano. Breaths were held unconsciously, eyes widened, and small gasps escaped from those caught in the swell of sound. The man played with a subtle power, never forceful, yet commanding attention in a way that felt entirely natural. For some, the music became a mirror, reflecting personal experiences and emotions they had carried silently. A young man in the corner thought of a friendship long lost, a friendship that had meant everything at the time. A woman near the center felt tears prick her eyes, thinking of moments of joy and sadness intertwined throughout her life. Each person took away a different meaning from the same melody, but all were united by the shared experience of feeling deeply moved together. The piano's voice softened again, returning to a more contemplative, gentle rhythm. The audience exhaled collectively, though many didn't even realize they had been holding their breath. The music had a way of drawing people in so completely that the outside world, the ticking clock, and the ongoing chatter seemed distant and irrelevant. There was only this moment, the man, and the piano, connecting everyone present in a silent conversation of emotion. Some in the room began to notice how the man's playing told a story beyond the music itself. There was a subtle narrative in the rise and fall of the keys, a sense of journey through different moods and memories. It was not just skill or technique. It was experience and empathy combined. The audience felt honored to witness it, as if the man had chosen this moment to share something deeply personal yet universally understood. The children, still quiet and attentive, began to sway slightly with the music, some tapping their small hands on their knees. Their parents exchanged gentle smiles, realizing that these moments of art and emotion were lessons in their own right. The elderly members of the community nodded knowingly, remembering times when music had held them together through difficult moments. Everyone, in their own way, was feeling the same unspoken truth, that human emotion could be shared and amplified through the simple act of playing music. As the second piece drew to a close, the man allowed a single, long note to linger, filling every corner of the hall with resonance. People remained still, savoring the final sound as it slowly faded into silence. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of reflection, emotion, and a sense of gratitude. Eyes were bright, some wet with tears, others filled with quiet joy. The room had transformed from a casual gathering to a shared experience of something rare and precious. Even after the last note disappeared, no one moved immediately. Conversations had not yet resumed, and the usual sounds of eating or laughter were absent. People sat, absorbing what had just happened, feeling the impact of music that spoke without words. The man remained at the piano, hands resting lightly on the keys, waiting for the next piece, the next chapter in the story that only he could tell. It was clear that the simple act of playing had created something magical. The hall was no longer just a place to meet. It had become a space of connection, reflection, and shared humanity. Everyone who had been present could feel it in their bones, an understanding that transcended language, age, and background. The music had unlocked a part of each person, leaving them more aware of themselves and of each other. As he prepared for the next piece, there was a sense of trust and anticipation in the room. The audience leaned in, some with hands folded, others with heads tilted slightly, ready to be taken on another journey. The man's fingers hovered over the keys, and the moment seemed timeless. Outside, the sun continued to shine, but inside the hall, time felt suspended, held by the delicate balance of notes, emotion, and attention. The man's next movements promised more depth, more exploration of feeling, and more shared experience. The audience had already been touched, but they knew that the story was only beginning. Every note, every pause, every subtle change in rhythm promised to reveal more of the heart behind the music. And so, in that quiet hall filled with strangers who had become witnesses to something extraordinary, the man continued to play, and the audience listened, captivated and moved beyond words. The music shifted again, and this time it carried a weight that seemed to press gently on the hearts of everyone in the hall. The notes were deeper, slower, filled with emotion that went beyond mere sound. It was as if the piano itself were speaking directly to each person, telling stories that could not be spoken aloud. The audience felt it immediately, leaning in, holding their breath, letting the sound travel through them. The man's hands moved across the keys with precision, but there was a tenderness in every touch. Each note seemed to have a life of its own, rising and falling with purpose, creating a landscape of feeling that was impossible to ignore. The room was no longer just a space for gathering. It had become a living vessel of shared human emotion. Even the children, who had been quiet observers until now, were completely absorbed, their eyes wide and unblinking. As the melody unfolded, people began to recognize fragments of familiar tunes, buried memories intertwined with the music. A woman thought she heard a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, and tears prickled at her eyes. A man remembered a song his father had played on an old piano in their living room, the memory bringing both joy and longing. The connection was personal yet universal, as if the piano had a map of everyone's heart and knew just where to touch. The music became more expressive, moving from gentle reflections to moments of intensity. The chords rose and fell like waves, sometimes crashing, sometimes soft and warm. The audience felt the ebb and flow physically, their hearts rising and falling with the music. Some clasped their hands together, holding onto the invisible thread that connected them all. Others leaned forward, completely absorbed, as if trying to capture the emotions in the air with their eyes and minds. The man never looked up. His eyes were focused on the keys, on the story he was telling, but it was clear that he could feel the audience's reaction. He adjusted the tempo subtly, allowing moments of pause for reflection, moments of crescendo to stir the soul. The music became a conversation, an intimate dialogue between the player and those listening, each note carrying meaning that went beyond words. People began to share silent glances, understanding passing between them without speaking. An elderly woman squeezed the hand of her neighbor, a simple gesture acknowledging the beauty and power of what was happening. Children nestled closer to their parents, feeling the emotion in ways they could not yet name but understanding that this moment was different, special. The energy in the room was gentle yet strong, a shared experience that bound everyone together. The melody shifted again, introducing a sense of sorrow that was soft and tender rather than overwhelming. The notes seemed to weep quietly, telling stories of loss, of missed opportunities, of love that had slipped through time. People felt the weight of their own experiences in the music, emotions they had carried silently finding a voice. Tears began to fall for some, rolling slowly down cheeks, unnoticed by others who were equally caught in the music. The man played on, seemingly unaware of the effect he was having, focused only on the story he was telling. The children sensed the change in mood and instinctively leaned into their parents, some whispering soft questions or murmuring comforting words. The parents smiled gently, trying to balance their own emotions with the need to reassure the little ones. Everyone in the room was experiencing the same complex emotions, yet each in their own personal way. There was no rush, no judgment, only the music guiding them through a journey of feeling. As the piece reached its climax, the room was completely silent, the kind of silence that feels alive and electric. Every person felt the intensity of the music in their chest, their breath synchronized with the rhythm of the keys. Some pressed their palms against their hearts, trying to hold onto the raw emotion coursing through them. Others let themselves sink into the sound, letting it wash over them, understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. The man's hands slowed, the notes softening, returning to the gentle, reflective quality from the beginning. The tension eased, replaced by a sense of release and understanding. The audience exhaled collectively, the sound of breath filling the room as people processed the emotional journey they had just been on. There were no words spoken, no applause yet, only the shared feeling of having been moved profoundly by the music. People began to look around, noticing each other in a new way. The music had opened their hearts, creating a quiet bond among strangers. A few exchanged nods or soft smiles, acknowledging the power of the moment without needing to speak. Even the children seemed to understand that they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would stay with them long after the gathering ended. The man paused, letting the final note linger in the air. It hung there like a gentle sigh, a conclusion to a story that had been felt rather than heard. The audience remained still, savoring the lingering emotion, reluctant to break the spell. The piano, which had seemed like just an instrument moments ago, now felt like a vessel of connection, a storyteller that had touched every heart in the room. Some people quietly wiped their eyes, trying to collect themselves. Others sat in silence, their expressions soft, reflective, and full of gratitude. The air was thick with emotion, a mixture of joy, nostalgia, and a profound sense of shared humanity. No one wanted to disturb the delicate balance that had been created, the fragile beauty that hung between notes and hearts. As the man prepared for the next piece, the audience felt a sense of trust, knowing that they were being led through a journey of emotion that would continue to unfold. The anticipation was not anxious but gentle, a quiet eagerness to see where the music would take them next. Each person understood, without needing explanation, that this was not just a performance but a gift, a rare glimpse into the power of human connection through art. The children leaned forward slightly, their small faces intent and serious, as if trying to understand the depth of feeling they sensed but could not yet fully name. Parents exchanged glances, sharing the silent acknowledgement that this experience was teaching more than any words could convey. Older members of the community felt nostalgia mingled with pride, recognizing the importance of moments like these in the tapestry of life. The man's hands hovered over the keys for a moment, and then he began again, this time with a melody that was softer, more introspective. The audience leaned in, allowing the music to envelop them once more. The notes carried hope, a gentle reminder that even after sorrow and reflection, there was beauty, comfort, and connection to be found. The room seemed to breathe with the music, every person attuned to the rhythm of the story being told. As the melody unfolded, the man's playing became more expressive, more nuanced. Each phrase held meaning, each chord was a message, and each pause was a moment of reflection. People felt the depth of human experience conveyed through the piano, the joy and pain, the laughter and tears, all interwoven in a way that felt intimate and personal. There was no need for words. The music spoke for itself, touching places in the heart that language could not reach. By the time the piece came to an end, the audience was fully absorbed in a moment of collective understanding. There were tears, soft smiles, and a profound sense of connection that transcended age, background, and experience. The man allowed the final note to linger, long enough for everyone to feel its resonance before slowly releasing it. The room remained silent, not out of awkwardness, but out of reverence for what had just transpired. Even after the last note faded, the impact remained. People sat quietly, letting the emotions settle, aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The man remained at the piano, hands resting lightly, a calm presence amidst the stirred hearts around him. The audience understood, without needing explanation, that the story was not over yet. There was more to come, more emotion to experience, more beauty to feel. In that moment, the hall was not just a space. It was a living memory, a shared experience that would remain with everyone present. Strangers were connected, children were learning, adults were reflecting, and the elderly were remembering. The music had created a bridge between hearts, an invisible thread of shared humanity that no one wanted to let go of. As the man prepared for the next piece, there was a sense of quiet anticipation. Everyone leaned in slightly, waiting, knowing that the next chapter of the musical story would continue to move them. The room was full of presence, attention, and emotion, ready to follow wherever the piano would lead. And so, in that hall, filled with ordinary people experiencing something extraordinary, the man continued to play, and the audience listened, captivated, open, and profoundly moved. The room was completely still as the next piece began. This time, the melody carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. Every note seemed to reach inside the listeners, pulling out emotions they didn't even know were there. The man's fingers moved across the keys with a steady, deliberate grace, each press sending a wave of feeling through the hall. The audience was mesmerized, caught in the ebb and flow of the music, hearts rising and falling with every chord. Tears began to form in the eyes of some, gentle and quiet at first, then rolling down cheeks as people surrendered to the emotions the music stirred. The man did not look at the audience, yet it felt as though he was speaking to each person individually, telling stories of love, loss, hope, and resilience without saying a single word. People wiped at their eyes, unsure if they were crying for themselves, for others, or simply for the beauty of the moment. Children leaned into their parents, sensing the deep emotions around them. Even though they could not fully understand, they felt the sincerity of the music and the unspoken bond it was creating. Parents held them close, allowing them to experience this connection to humanity and emotion without explanation. The room, once filled with laughter and chatter, had transformed into a space of quiet reflection, every heart attuned to the piano's voice. Some adults closed their eyes, letting the music guide them through memories they had long tucked away. A man recalled moments of friendship lost and regained. A woman remembered a long-ago love that had shaped her life. The piano gave voice to feelings that words could not reach, allowing everyone to acknowledge and embrace their own emotional journey. Each person felt a part of a larger story, connected to the others in the room in a silent understanding. The man's playing grew more intense, the notes rising and falling with a dynamic energy that seemed to echo the complexities of life itself. The music swelled, carrying both the joy of triumph and the pain of heartbreak. Some people pressed their hands to their hearts, feeling the power of the sound resonate through them physically. Others leaned forward, captivated, trying to capture every nuance, every subtle shift in tone and rhythm. A few people let out soft gasps as the music reached particularly poignant moments. The depth of feeling was overwhelming, and many struggled to contain the tears that welled in their eyes. Yet no one looked away. Everyone stayed, drawn to the raw honesty of the performance. The man's hands moved with confidence and emotion, guiding the audience through the highs and lows of the story he was telling through the piano. The melody softened, transitioning into a more reflective, intimate phase. The audience held their breath, letting the notes sink deeply into their hearts. Some silently touched the hands of the people next to them, feeling a shared sense of connection and understanding. The music had broken down barriers, creating a collective experience that transcended words, age, and personal history. As the piece continued, it became clear that the man was not just playing music but communicating with the room, with every soul present. The notes spoke of human vulnerability, resilience, and the profound beauty found in simple moments. People were moved in ways that were both personal and universal, feeling both their individual stories and the collective story of all who were present. The hall became a sanctuary, a place where emotion could flow freely and openly. Tears were now common, and the room was filled with quiet sobs, sniffles, and gentle sighs. Some people clutched tissues, dabbing at their eyes, while others remained still, overwhelmed by the flood of feeling. The children were calm, some resting their heads on their parents' shoulders, absorbing the solemnity and beauty of the music. No one wanted to break the spell, the moment of shared emotion that had drawn everyone together. The music shifted again, moving toward a place of hope and gentle uplift. The chords became lighter, more fluid, suggesting renewal and a quiet optimism. The audience exhaled, feeling the tension release as the notes offered comfort and reassurance. People looked around at one another, noticing the shared experience, the silent acknowledgement that they had witnessed something extraordinary together. Some quietly whispered to their neighbors, sharing observations or emotional responses, but the overall atmosphere remained reverent and reflective. Everyone understood that this was not just a performance. It was a gift, a rare moment where the essence of humanity was expressed through sound. The man's focus never wavered. He continued to pour himself into the music, aware or unaware of the profound effect he had on those listening. The room felt suspended in time, each second stretching to allow the emotions to fully resonate. Some people touched their hearts, overwhelmed by gratitude, while others simply closed their eyes, surrendering to the experience. Every note, every pause, every subtle movement of the man's fingers seemed deliberate, a precise communication of feeling that needed no words. The children, having felt the depth of sorrow and hope, now seemed more attuned to the emotional landscape. They had witnessed the power of expression through music and understood, in a way that words could not convey, that feelings could be shared and felt deeply without speaking. The parents watched them, silently proud and moved by the lessons unfolding before their eyes. As the piece approached its conclusion, the music became more delicate, almost fragile. The notes lingered, each one carrying a sense of finality and reflection. People exhaled collectively, their breaths gentle and synchronized, as if acknowledging the beauty of what they had just experienced. Tears were still present, but now they were mixed with smiles and a sense of peace. The man allowed the last note to hang in the air, a quiet farewell that felt like both an ending and a continuation. The silence that followed was thick with emotion, every person present fully aware of the impact of the performance. No one rushed to speak. No one moved immediately. They sat together in a shared understanding, connected by the journey they had taken through music and feeling. Some began to softly murmur thanks, expressions of gratitude and admiration, but the room remained calm and centered. Everyone had been touched, some deeply, some subtly, but all had been affected by the honesty and beauty of the music. The man remained seated, hands resting lightly on the keys, as if offering a quiet invitation for the audience to reflect, to process, and to absorb the emotions that had been stirred. It was clear that this performance had left a mark, not just as entertainment, but as a profound human experience. People felt lighter, more aware of the depth of emotion that life could bring, and more connected to those around them. The hall had become a sanctuary of understanding, empathy, and shared human experience. The children began to whisper softly to each other, sharing small observations, and parents smiled gently, seeing that these moments would stay with their young ones. The adults, too, felt the importance of what they had witnessed, understanding that this was a rare gift, one that would be remembered long after the day had ended. The man quietly prepared for the next piece, the anticipation in the room gentle but palpable. The audience leaned in, ready to continue the journey, fully aware that the next chapter of music would further explore the depths of human emotion. They had already been moved profoundly, yet there was an unspoken understanding that the story was not finished, that more beauty, more reflection, and more connection awaited in the notes yet to come. And so, in that quiet hall, filled with ordinary people experiencing something extraordinary, the man continued to play, and the audience listened, fully immersed, hearts open, and tears freely falling, sharing a moment of humanity that would stay with them forever. The final piece began softly, almost like a gentle whisper. The man's hands moved over the keys with grace, each note deliberate, carrying a sense of closure and reflection. The audience leaned in, fully present, as if knowing that this was the moment that would stay with them the longest. The music wrapped around the hall, filling every corner, yet it carried a quiet intimacy, as though speaking directly to each listener. The melody was tender, touching on themes of hope, gratitude, and the simple beauty of life. Each chord seemed to tell a story of resilience, of moments when people had found strength in themselves or in each other. The audience felt it deeply, many holding their hands over their hearts, some with eyes closed, breathing in the emotion like air. The man did not rush. He allowed the music to flow naturally, giving it space to resonate within each person. People reflected on their own lives as they listened. Memories of childhood, of friendships, of small acts of kindness surfaced, accompanied by the warmth of feeling seen and understood. A young woman thought of her grandmother's gentle hands, a comforting presence in her childhood. An older man remembered a long-forgotten friend, and a smile formed despite the tears that had gathered. The music had a way of reaching inside, unlocking emotions that had been tucked away for years. Children sat quietly, some leaning against their parents, absorbing the calm and beauty of the moment. They did not fully understand the depth of the music, but they sensed its importance, the way it carried emotion that transcended words. The parents looked down at them, realizing that these were the lessons that mattered, showing them the power of feeling deeply, of connecting to something larger than themselves. The melody gradually built, not with intensity or force, but with a gentle accumulation of warmth and emotion. It rose like a quiet sunrise, casting light over hearts that had been stirred by the previous pieces. The audience felt uplifted, a sense of calm hope spreading among them. Even those who had been moved to tears now felt a comforting peace, a reassurance that life, with all its trials and joys, was beautiful and meaningful. Some people reached for the hands of those sitting next to them, offering comfort, solidarity, or simply a shared acknowledgement of what they were experiencing. The room felt like a tapestry of human connection, each person woven into the moment by the simple act of listening and feeling. Strangers were united in emotion, understanding each other without words, connected by the universal language of music. The man's playing became softer again, more reflective, like the final brushstrokes on a painting. Every note was careful, precise, and full of heart. The audience could feel the conclusion approaching, and yet no one wanted it to end. They leaned in slightly, holding onto the music as if it were a fragile treasure, knowing that these moments of profound human connection were rare. The children, sensing the gentleness of the ending, rested their heads quietly, some closing their eyes. Parents watched them with gentle smiles, feeling the continuity of emotion from one generation to another. Even the elderly, who had witnessed countless events in their lives, sat quietly, touched in ways they had not anticipated. The music had spoken to everyone equally, without distinction or bias, a pure expression of humanity. The final phrases were slow, deliberate, almost like a goodbye. Each note lingered, echoing softly across the hall, allowing the audience to absorb the full depth of what they had experienced. There was a shared understanding, a quiet reverence for the moment, that transcended the need for applause or words. People felt changed, in small but significant ways, their hearts lighter, yet fuller than before. As the last note faded, the room remained still, bathed in the silence that followed. It was a silence filled with reflection, gratitude, and awe. Some whispered softly, sharing thoughts or simple expressions of thanks. Others remained motionless, letting the emotion settle, savoring the impact of the performance. The children peeked up at their parents, sensing the importance of the experience even without understanding it fully. The man slowly stood, closing the piano lid gently. He looked around the hall, a quiet, humble acknowledgement of the shared experience. There was no need for words. The music had spoken everything. People exchanged glances, nodding slightly, a silent recognition that something extraordinary had just happened. The room felt lighter yet more profound, as though everyone carried a piece of the music in their hearts. Attendees lingered, reluctant to break the spell. Conversations were soft, subdued, filled with awe and reflection. People spoke of memories, of feelings, of moments in their lives that the music had touched. Some shared stories, others simply hugged or held hands, knowing that the experience had forged a quiet connection among them. The music had reminded them of their shared humanity, the power of emotion, and the beauty of feeling deeply. The children, now more relaxed, began to talk in hushed voices, recounting what they had felt, pointing to the piano, and mimicking the gestures of the man. Parents smiled, seeing that the impression had been made, that this moment would stay with the younger generation as a lesson in empathy, presence, and the beauty of expression. As the man prepared to leave, people approached him quietly, some offering thanks, some simply nodding, unable to find words for what they had experienced. He received their gratitude with a gentle smile, acknowledging each gesture without drawing attention to himself. The room had been transformed, not by grandeur or spectacle, but by the quiet power of sincerity, skill, and emotion expressed through music. He picked up his worn piano case, moving slowly and deliberately toward the door. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the hall and the people within it, casting a gentle glow over the scene. Everyone watched, understanding that the moment had come to an end, yet its impact would linger far longer than the music itself. As he stepped outside, the door closing softly behind him, the audience remained in a reflective silence. Some sat quietly, others whispered softly, still processing the depth of the experience. The hall felt empty yet full, the presence of the man and his music lingering in the hearts and minds of all who had been there. The experience had been more than entertainment. It had been a journey into emotion, memory, and shared humanity. People began to slowly leave the hall, carrying with them the echoes of the music, the feelings stirred, and the reminder of connection that had been created. Conversations began, soft smiles were shared, and the sense of community felt deeper, more meaningful, as if the music had reminded everyone of the simple, yet profound, importance of human connection. The children walked with their parents, hand in hand, speaking softly about what they had felt. Parents smiled, realizing that this was a memory that would stay with them, a moment that would quietly influence how they experienced life and emotion in the future. Elderly attendees lingered in thought, their minds wandering through memories brought forth by the music, feeling a renewed sense of appreciation for the present. The room, once lively and filled with chatter, now held a quiet resonance, the lingering presence of what had been shared. The man, walking away from the hall, disappeared into the distance, carrying with him the gift of music, leaving behind a community forever touched by his playing. The piano remained, silent now, yet holding the echoes of the emotions it had conveyed, waiting for the next moment it would be called to speak. Even after the hall emptied, the impact stayed. People remembered the expressions, the tears, the smiles, and the shared understanding that had formed. The experience became a story they would recount, not for the novelty, but for the memory of connection, empathy, and the power of one person's gift to touch many hearts. The music had reminded them that beauty can be found in small, unexpected moments, and that a single act of sincerity can leave a lasting mark. In the end, the man's piano playing had done more than entertain. It had created a space for reflection, for connection, and for feeling deeply. Everyone present carried a piece of that moment with them, a reminder that even in ordinary places, extraordinary experiences can happen. The hall was empty, the music had ended, but the echoes remained in hearts, minds, and souls, a testament to the quiet power of human expression and the lasting impact of a shared emotional journey.